week, Love Your Burial Ground week. Oh, thank you, Anna. Love Your Burial Ground week, Churches Count on Nature, and National Cemeteries Week, dedicated to basically celebrating these wonderful spaces, but also celebrating the people who look after them. And there must be around over 150,000 people dedicating their time to looking after these really special spaces. And this is a week also to say thank you to those people for doing that. So I'm from, like I say, Caring for God's Acre, and we've organised these webinars because we're providing environmental support to the Church of England. As you just heard, the webinar will be recorded, and this is so people can catch up who've registered but can't actually make it now. If you would like to turn your screens off because you might not want your face on, that's absolutely fine. But it will be recorded, and the questions at the end. In terms of questions, if you could pop them in the chat, and I'll ask Bishop Graham after the webinar, and I'll go through them and ask him your questions if that's okay. So fabulous. I hope you got a cup of tea, sitting comfortably, popcorn or whatever is your... I've got some porridge actually that I've just finished, so not quite as nice as popcorn. But so today we're starting the week with Bishop Graham, who's Bishop of Norwich. He's an ecologist and the Church of England's lead bishop in the environment. And we're really delighted, Bishop Graham, to have you here today to start off the week of wonderful webinars. I will mute now and hand over to you.
Well, Andrea, thank you very much. And it's a joy to be back doing another webinar. Last year, I really enjoyed the webinar that I explored with many of you on this call about attentiveness to nature. So this year is a slightly different theme, but something that I'm very passionate about, and I hope will be able to whet your appetites about the communion forest. So I hope to speak for half the time perhaps, and then to field any questions that you might have or observations. It's always good to get feedback and to hear your reflections. There may be people already involved with the communion forest, and they can share what they're doing with the wider group. So the communion forest is an initiative of the Anglican Communion, and at the moment I can't get my, there we go, an initiative of the Anglican Communion to look at how we conserve, protect and plant ecosystems across the Anglican Communion. It is a really exciting initiative, not only about tree growing, but about ecosystem conservation, protection and restoration. And it's a worldwide project. It could potentially become one of the most ecologically diverse and geographically widespread environment initiatives in the world. And it's just coming up to being 2 years old, because it was a legacy project of the Lambeth Conference, which is the 10-yearly or so gathering of Anglican bishops from around the world in Canterbury. And it was to be in 2020, but it was postponed to 2022. And we had a whole day of the Lambeth Conference looking at environmental issues. It was the day that we actually were at Lambeth Palace. And one of the very significant moments of that incredible day was the launch of the communion forest with the planting of a tree. And every bishop and their spouse as well, they were there, added soil to plant this tree in the planter. It was one of the hottest days of the year in July. So the tree actually wasn't planted in the ground until a good planting period in the autumn. But this was very much a key moment in the Lambeth Conference, as we pledged as bishops to go back to our dioceses and provinces with a message from around the world that we need to really take care of creation in a much greater way than we have been. The Archbishop of Canterbury on that day said, the communion forest is a symbol and an act of hope, something we can do together as God's church for God's world as we journey on from the Lambeth Conference. So what is the Anglican Communion. Some on this call might not be Anglican, and so it's a worldwide family of churches stretching right across the globe in different provinces. I think there's 45 provinces of the Anglican Communion at the moment, with about 85 million members across 165 countries. So in all kinds of different places, Anglicans gather to worship. And many of our sisters and brothers around the Anglican Communion are already faced with the adverse impact of climate change and biodiversity loss and pollution. I think I will never forget the words of the Bishop of Vanuatu, really appealing to me at the Lambeth Conference to take the environmental crises we face very seriously. He said to me that his islands are sinking. Now, of course, we often use the phrase that the sea level is rising, and he used this phrase that his islands are sinking, which made me think of things in a very different light, but also his huge sense that many island nations are disappearing or leading to migration, which is leading to conflict, which is leading to war. And the challenges that were brought to the Lambeth Conference by bishops from around the world, many of whom are on the front line of the devastation of climate change, were very, very real. But as was their hope of things that they are already doing. And I want to come on and speak a little bit about that later in this webinar. So one of the 5 marks of mission of the Anglican Communion is to strive to safeguard the integrity of creation and sustain and renew the life of the earth. We see this as an integral part of our Christian discipleship, our journey daily with the Lord, how we care for God's creation, how it should be woven into our worshipping life and our daily life of practice of our communities living, and how we manage church land and the resources that we have, how we invest our money as well. And so the communion forest is a very practical, spiritual and symbolic response to the environmental crisis that we face. And here's a picture of one of the bishops adding their little bit of soil to the tree that we planted that day, an oak, an English oak. And so everyone had a sense that they'd been involved in planting this tree, and a commitment to go back to their diocese, as I've said, to continue this incredible worldwide project. And it's a project that is facilitated by the Anglican Alliance, our development agency within the Anglican Communion, and the Anglican Communion Environmental Network. And there is an advisory group, which I'm privileged to chair, drawn from across the Anglican Communion to help direct and provide encouragement for this area of work. Now, as background, of course, we've been gifted a world of breathtaking beauty, astounding abundance, and intricate interconnection. It's a world that God declares good and loves. And as I read the scriptures, I continue to see this sense of the stewardship of God's creation. Indeed, so we read the Gospels, we see how Jesus takes note. He sees the birds of the air, the lilies of the field, and treasures and values the world around him. But the reality at this current time, as those on this call will well know, are the 3 interlinked aspects of biodiversity loss, of climate change, and of pollution that are increasingly impacting on the world. We're seeing devastating loss of habitats and species, a loss of extinctions increasing more than they ever have done in history, of the global temperatures seemingly almost monthly at the moment breaking records and a using up of the world's resources at an ever increasing and alarming rate. And of course, many, because of the interlinking of climate change, of extraction, of exploitation, the world's forests and other plant communities are imperiled. And they contain such biodiversity in and of themselves. So here is a crisis that we're facing as a worldwide community on this single island planet home of ours. And this is why, as Anglicans around the world, we want to respond in a very positive way, because we see the crisis, the existential threat to millions of people around the globe, particularly the poorest people around the world, those who are least able to mitigate, least able to afford to adapt, those who rely on food products and other resources all around them. The impacts of this crisis are costly on every level, from financial to the impact of trauma on people's lives. And we increasingly hear horrendous stories that are impacting on our brothers and sisters throughout the world. We should never forget that the average Anglican, of course, is a young woman under the age of 30, living in a place of conflict or emerging from conflict, living on less than $1 a day, and living on the front line of climate change and biodiversity loss. I see this area as an opportunity for evangelism, because for any institution, it strikes me, or any church, to be credible, particularly with those aged under 40, we need to be taking very seriously the environmental crisis. And opportunities that afford themselves, like Churches Count on Nature this week, of engaging with the communion forest, are events that can engage with the wider community around churches. They're those sort of fringe sort of activities that can network into a much wider group of people who might not necessarily come and join us for worship, but they can provide interests, they can provide for an inquiring mind, for people to come and be part of our life together in Christ. And when we look at some of the surveys that have been done, climate anxiety in children and young people is a very real issue that we're facing at this time. Each summer, I take a group of young adults from the Diocese of Norwich to Taizé, the religious community in France. And in Taizé, there's a tradition that some brothers visiting bishops stay after evening prayer in the church to listen to young adults, and you can spend, an hour and a half, 2 hours there listening to concerns that young adults bring, and there are all sorts of things that they bring around relationships, around addictions, around worry about work. But I've noticed increasingly, as I've listened to young adults at Taizé, particularly those from Germany and Poland, an increasing anxiety about the planet. And last summer, I was very struck by a number of young adults who came asking for guidance and help because they were worried about having children and the sort of world, if they were to have children, their children would grow up in, and whether they should not have children. And just listening to them, I, of course, have no answers, but just listening, I think, can sometimes be helpful. As Rowan Williams had the wonderful phrase, some people just need a good listening to. But the sense of climate fear and worry was very much a part of the narrative, certainly at Taizé, and I've spoken to other Christian leaders who have said that something they are coming across increasingly in youth groups and young adult groups. So Antonio Guterres, the UN General Secretary, said these words, which I think are very important for us to take note of. Humanity is waging, war on nature. This is senseless and suicidal. The consequences of our recklessness are already apparent in human suffering, towering economic losses, and the accelerating erosion of life on Earth. Friends, this is the reality that is being seen around the world, being seen by Anglicans and other Christians, other people of goodwill around the world. And the world is at, a particular point now. It's a decision point. The planet is heating up. The vital biodiversity that protects and connects life on the planet is crashing, and the risk of economic instability for millions of people is increasing. We've already spoken about migration and conflict and climate change being a driver for refugees and migration. These challenges are interconnected, and forests can provide a vital nature-based solution to help address this triple challenge. Forests are not the only solution, but we can't succeed without them. And so one of the ways in which we can respond as Anglicans to the environmental crisis we face is by planting trees. Trees and forests, they stabilize the climate, they contribute to that, they contribute to the protection around flooding, particularly in floodplains, by slowing water down. They sequester carbon, they sustain biodiversity, and they generate food and livelihoods. And Christiana Figueres, who's a great hero of mine, she led the UN COP on climate change for a number of years. She has spoken movingly about the planting of trees. In addressing climate change, few actions are as critical, as urgent, or as simple as planting trees. This ancient carbon absorbing technology needs no high technology, is completely safe and is very cheap. It literally reverses the process that has led to climate change, in that as trees and all other biomass grow, they absorb carbon dioxide from the air, release oxygen, and return carbon to its rightful location in the soil. So what we're attempting to do has large support from science and from within the UN COP community and leadership. And when we turn to scripture, and there are many places that the Bible speaks about trees, in the sense it begins in the garden of trees and it ends in a city with a river lined by trees, and the leaves of the trees are for the healing of the nations. So that message from Revelation, I think, is a very important one, and is very much in line, or we're trying to align what we're doing with the communion forest to that healing of the nations by the leaves of the trees. Now, what we are able to do might be a tiny drop in an ocean, but I believe it can foster a bit like gathering more to it, other organizations to do similarly, and it could be a great momentum for change in our world. But some of the issues that we're facing around climate change and biodiversity loss goes to the heart of being spiritual people, and is a spiritual challenge. And this was identified by a former dean of forestry and environmental studies at Yale, though I have used this quote for quite some time and read fairly recently that it might not have actually been said by him, but perhaps should have been said by him. Though I do need to be just a little bit careful with this quote as to its provenance. But Gus Speth said this: I used to think the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. But I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. To deal with these issues, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation, and we scientists do not know how to do that. So, as well as being very practical, the communion forest is also about teaching, is about our life of prayer, about how we live as disciples of Jesus Christ, how we see the whole of our existence, our interconnectedness with creation as deep down as spiritual matter. And of course, we say in our daily prayers, often more than once each day, give us today our daily bread. It's an appeal to have just enough, to have enough to live on, not to gather up in barns, not to have a huge banquet, a feast every day, more than we need, but to have enough. Give us today our daily bread. So it's not just a physical crisis, but it's a spiritual one. And we must see the world differently, repenting for the sin individually, corporately, globally, that we are connected with. And often I find it's some of the indigenous people that I engage with around the Anglican Communion who teach me more than anything through their lens, through their reading of Scripture, about how to live a life more simply so that others might simply live, as well as the wealth of knowledge and experience and expertise that they have about the ecosystems that they live amongst and within, and indeed depend on. So overall, our aim with the Communion Forest is to significantly increase tree planting, ecosystem conservation, protection and restoration of habitats across the Anglican world. That's a big ambition, a big ask, but we want to have a big vision, an expansive vision for what we're trying to do, so we might individually, corporately, as parishes, dioceses, and provinces of the Anglican Communion, deepen our care for creation. And so it's a worldwide initiative, but it's made up of lots of local activities around this tree growing, around conservation, protection, and restoration. And activities are bubbling up all over the place. The bishops who came to the Lambeth conference did go away really very enthused, and it's so very exciting to see different projects around the world being registered. And there's no doubt far more going on than is being registered. So what actions might a church take? What actions might you take with your local church and register as being part of the Communion Forest? Well, getting involved with conservation or advocacy, action to protect landscapes or to restore pieces of land. It's many a church that's got a bit of wasteland, land that has at the edges of car parks and things, that with some imagination and fairly cheaply can become much more biodiverse and interesting places. Or growing your own trees on church land, replacing trees that have been felled in the past in hedgerows, adding to your churchyard, or mowing your churchyard in a particular way so that the wild flowers come through, that the biodiversity of your churchyard increases. And I know Caring for God's Sake has got some really good signage that explains that, because with good interpretation, I think we can do lots more in our churchyards. I'm keep saying that churchyards should be places of the living, not just the dead. And we might be keen to sponsor projects around the world. When I moved to Norwich, having been Bishop of Dudley, of course, there came that question: what would you like as a leaving present? We're going to have a collection for you which is incredibly generous. And so I asked whether the collection could be for a tree nursery I'd seen in our link diocese in Morogoro in Tanzania. Diocese of Worcester and the Diocese of Morogoro have a companion link. And I was just delighted that people responded so generously so that more trees could be grown in this Anglican little tree nursery to support the local parishes plant more trees, which all helps with shade, with timber, with maintaining soil health, which is so vital around the world, as you know, we do live on just a few inches of soil to sustain life. And these local expressions can be of all manner of kinds, and that's what's happening around the Anglican Communion. Planting trees, restoring wasteland, creating wildlife churchyards, tree nurseries, local conservation projects, or advocating to prevent destruction of habitats. Lots of little initiatives that add up to quite an incredible project around the world. And of course, it doesn't have to be trees. I know we're calling it the communion forest, but the reality is that we want to encourage the restoration, conservation, protection of all habitats. And so it may be that you're in a part of the world or an urban area where different sorts of habitat are the major habitat around where your Christian community is gathered. So it can be about all sorts of other projects. I'll talk about a mangrove planting project with youth in a few moments. But it may be about prairies or the restoration of rivers. What is the local habitat near you that your church might get involved with and register for this project? And so there's a huge amount that is already happening, which is just really great to see. And what we're beginning to find is that people are learning from one another and being inspired to do more. There's a really good website for the Communion Forest and various resources available on that. So do please take a look. We've got a fairly small staff team who are doing great links, particularly in Africa, where this has really taken off in an extraordinary way. There are opportunities for informal prayer, resources, there's various connecting sessions online, web stories and newsletters, all that are available to encourage people to engage with and be part of this story of the Communion Forest. Also, we're looking increasingly at where funding can come from, particularly for parts of the world which are adversely impacted by climate change, but have not been the major polluters, the major people who've been putting carbon into the atmosphere. Whilst I have some concerns around offsetting, it is an opportunity for using funds to be able to turn into planting trees through Anglican projects. There's a very good Christian organization called Climate Stewards, which does good work in this area. And then we're doing a whole range of different things across the communion. So, the Church of South India with its green schools, or the Franciscan Brothers on the Solomon Islands, who are really campaigning and advocates for the protection of land from logging, particularly virgin forest from logging, and they're taking a very proactive and often a fairly dangerous role in some parts of the world where advocacy can mean that you become targeted in a pretty nasty and messy way. These are brave people. So in terms of advocacy, speaking out against forest encroachments, monitoring the implementation of what government is saying they will do, are they actually delivering and doing it, raising awareness with communities, and challenging the extractive and unsustainable use of the world's natural resources. And all sorts of things have been going on already within the communion, but have been sort of brought together under the umbrella of the communion forest in what I think is quite an exciting way. I'm sorry, there's a mugshot of me there because I give out hazel trees to every confirmation candidate in the Diocese of Norwich. And why a hazel tree? Well, Mother Julian of Norwich took in the palm of her hand a small hazelnut, and I usually have some here on my desk. I can't find them at the moment. And in that moment saw something of the wonder and glory of God. And so I give out a hazel tree sapling to everyone I confirm, in the hope that as it grows, the candidate's faith will live and grow, and one day they might be able to hold a hazelnut in the palm of their hand from their own hazel tree and see in that moment, like Mother Julian of Norwich, something of the awesome wonder of God. And I've been here 5 years now, not yet heard of any hazelnuts being produced, but I keep hearing reports from people as I go around the diocese about the state of their hazel tree and how it's growing, which is always really encouraging, a great opener for conversation. But indigenous tree nurseries in Amazonia, there's mangrove swamp restoration in the Philippines, particularly involving Anglican youth to do that, to go out and plant mango saplings. That is very important to protect coastal villages and communities from tidal surges. And the solar power that is being undertaken in Zimbabwe. For more examples, a gathering of 3 linked dioceses, Iowa, Swaziland, and Brechin in Scotland, committing themselves to work together on environmental projects. And various communities around the communion are significantly involved in planting trees. I think the church in Kenya, I hope I've got this figure right, I think it's 15 million trees. It might be 16 million trees they are intending to plant, and they're well on track before 2026. So, across the African continent, this work is really doing incredibly well. And I must admit that I only nicked the trees at confirmation idea from an African bishop in Tanzania. So that was not a new idea for me. It was something I thought, well, that's good. Let's get it going also in the Church of England. So that's taken on in other places as well. I know the Bishop of Brisbane, and he's Archbishop of Brisbane. He's now doing the same in Ireland. Wildflower meadows. Interestingly, in England, we've lost 97% of our flower meadows since the 1930s. So often our churchyards are one of the few places where the sward, where the turf still has ancient seeds in that can come up, and orchids that can flower if we do the mowing regime right. And my dear friend Bishop Michael from Bath and Wells, I was at his installation in Wells Cathedral, and as we left, we were all given tree saplings to go and plant to mark his beginning as Bishop of Bath and Wells. So that was great to see that happening, and I'd love to see it more at significant moments, baptisms, weddings, etc. Giving people a tree to plant. I'd love that every child has the opportunity to plant a tree at primary school. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Because I think getting your hands dirty in the soil, planting a living thing that may well outlive you, I think is a wonderful thing to do. And then a church commissioners project. This has just recently been undertaken, that the church commissioners' first contribution to the communion forest is Bartisham Meadows, just outside Hereford, in a floodplain, which is going to be managed for nature in partnership with the Hereford Wildlife Trust. And I hope this might be the first of a number of different initiatives the Church Commissioners do. They look after the historic endowment of the Church of England, and are certainly taking very, very seriously under their ESG, environment, social and governance measures, how they look after their land, how we work with our tenant farmers, our forestry, so that we can manage our land in such a way that is good for people, good for business, but also good for nature. So I'm quite excited about some of these initiatives, and this part of the community forest, which is all about adding wildlife, adding hedgerows and trees within a floodplain, and enhancing the biodiversity of that land. So my question to you all on this seminar is, what's the next thing that God is calling you to do where you are, with the unique assets that you have, with the unique landscape, habitats, flora and fauna around you? Because might you join in and add to the map of the community forest, to add your little part to it? I hope that you will do. I love this quote from Martin Luther, who said, "Even if I knew that tomorrow the world would go to pieces, I would still plant my apple tree." As we look around the world at the moment, it is quite terrifying and frightening what we see. I hope and pray that we can plant more trees as a sign, for me, that to plant is to hope, that to restore is to heal, and to protect is to love. That's what I believe we're called to do. And I hope that I've whetted your appetite a little bit about the community forest, and how being part of it is about being hope-filled, healing and loving the planet, this single island planet home that we share with such a rich diversity of biodiversity. And I certainly want to pass that on to my children and grandchildren in a better state than I've inherited it. God bless you in your endeavors and what God might be calling you to do in your local community. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. That was very, very inspiring. Quite humbling, actually, isn't it, to think of the risks other people take to do things that actually we would find it very easy to do in our country, whether it be planting trees or stop a development or whatever. We would, it's not exactly getting out of our comfort zone, is it, to object to something or to galvanize people, whereas in other countries it's such a risk for some people. It's interesting that you pointed that out. There are some questions coming in. Are you got time to just answer some of them? Is that okay?
Absolutely. Yes.
Thank you. So going from the top, Charles Croydon asked, what percentage of the Church Commissioner's land is managed for biodiversity? Well, that's a big question.
I'm afraid I don't have an answer to that, but what we are trying to do is, because much of the Church Commission's land is in agricultural tenancies, often historic tenancies that go back through generations of families, where you cannot direct, but you can bring influence. So we're doing a number of things through farming and wildlife advisory groups, bringing tenants together to share good practice and see examples of good practice on our land. We're new tenancies under the new tenancy agreements, we can be much more directive about, and that includes an assessment of soil health at the beginning of a tenancy, and looking at how that is changing over time, and seeking for that to be in a positive direction. And certainly all our forestry, which is mostly in Scotland, is forest certified timber, which has various conservation imperatives built into it to be able to qualify. So a mix of broadleaf, particularly broadleaf alongside streams and rivers to provide dapple shade for fish and other biodiversity, and raptor posts. So when there's felling of timber, that we leave in post a certain percentage of standing trees or standing dead trees for raptors to use. So the team that manage that are very proud of how we can combine farming and forestry. We're also doing things within our urban estate, so such as the Hyde Park estate in London, which the Church Commissioners owned, so that it is benefiting from enhancement, so that we're trying to have a better ecological balance within those estates.
Great, thank you. I presume there's like a steering group, is there, that looks at each of your sort of land holdings and then thinks, how can we kind of influence this in a more sort of directional way for biodiversity? Is that how it happens, so that it's not?
No, there's the Church Commissioners have a board which hears reports, but it's really through our land managers, and we have a very strong ESG team working both on the investment side, but also on the real assets, the land holding side as well.
Great. Thank you. I hope that answered that for you, Charles. Thank you. Sharon Hall asked, is there a strategy to grow communion forest participation in the UK? And what more support is needed to ensure website contacts and emails are actioned? I don't know what the last bit means.
Yeah, well, this is part of that engagement. I was really keen that to speak about this topic this year on this webinar. There's been various articles in different church press about it, but we're very keen to spread the message further about the community forest through the network of Darson environment officers who do a brilliant job around England, but also to spread the news of this around different provinces of the Anglican Communion. So where you can pass on the message and refer people to the website that I mentioned, please do, because it's all part of sharing this really good news story that's going on around the Anglican Communion.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so Sharon also asked, who's the best contact for communal forest in the UK? I heard there's a team near Coventry, but I can't find them online. So if somebody wanted to, actually speak to somebody or email a directly to a person.
So the team are based in Africa who are running it, but if you look at the Communion Forest website, I think there'll be details there of how to make contact.
Okay, thank you. Helen Stevens.
So they're based out of Nairobi in Kenya.
Right, yeah. So if somebody wanted to kind of fly the flag for it here, there isn't really a UK contact. Well, I suppose you are, because you're helping spread the word, but in terms of sort of somebody who can answer an email if somebody thinks, oh, I have an idea in my diocese to do something, I think it would fit into the forest initiative. Is it the African contact they would then get hold of, is it?
Perhaps I'm just looking at Rachel, who's my colleague. I think if Rachel were able to put her email into the chat, then if you've got a question, do ask Rachel, and she'll be able to signpost you where is best.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
Is that okay, Rachel? Yeah, thank you very much.
It's like that with a worldwide initiative, isn't it? Brilliant. And yeah, so Helen Stevens said, are you aware of Communion Forest Initiative partnerships with other denominations?
I'm not. No, it's been very much an Anglican initiative, but of course we would welcome others who want to be part of it. I think the more the merrier. Yeah, I am certainly aware of particularly other faith communities who are doing a lot of tree planting and conservation at the moment. That we tend to meet other faith communities as faith actors at UN events, and certainly there's lots of encouragement for that around the world. Yeah, thank you. That's great. So Charles has also said there is a need to establish a percentage of church commissioners, land managed for biodiversity to know the baseline and measure progress.
please will you ask the church commissioners to include this information in their annual report with other ESG goals?
It may already be there. I don't know if Rachel can find it, but there is an annual ESG report from the church commissioners. If she can find it, she'll put it into the link, because there is that sort of reporting is already being done, and they have an annual, very good annual report outlining the ESG work that they're doing. If we can find it in time for the end of the seminar, we'll add it in.
Thank you. Yeah, I've seen some really good reports, so that's great. So
well, please, please look at the type in church commissioners biodiversity report or something like that, and see where you can find it, because it's very impressive piece of work, and it's something that church commissioners are very proud of what they're trying to do.
Yeah, that's great. And also, if we all kind of, and it's quite good to spread the word about all the good things that are going on, because it kind of encourages people, doesn't it, to get involved and to do more. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, are there any other questions? We are nearly up in our time, but I think that's it. I'll just scroll through. Oh, a new message. Here, thank you, Rachel. That's lovely. Lots of CC reports here with the latest stewardship report here. So there's 2 links there that you can either click on right now or copy and paste as well. You might want to copy and paste as well as click on. I'll leave those there. That's great.
Thank you, Rachel, very much. See,
Rachel to the rescue there. As I just, but the stewardship report promises a biodiversity strategy, but I think we're still waiting for this. Yeah, great, lovely. Thank you very. Just scrolling through, but I think that is it. So thank you very much. It's really lovely webinar, really great, informative and inspiring webinar to start off our week series. So, and thank you very much for that, and for doing all those interviews yesterday on Churches Count on Nature and Love Your Burial Ground Week. We're sort of saying at the beginning of the webinar that if anybody here is actually involved in managing, well, any land, but I suppose for Churches Count on Nature, sort of churchyards, burial grounds, that kind of thing, then you are our unsung heroes, and there's so much that you do that often goes unnoticed sometimes in the wider community. And we are aware that when you do start managing things differently for conservation, that is when you sometimes get the complaints and people coming out of the woodwork. But there was a study done down in Chichester, and they found that they questioned everybody, and they found that in every community, when the churchyard management changed, there was always 3% consistently that complained about it. And the other 97% basically either didn't say anything or were actually quite happy, but didn't say anything. And some people didn't notice at all. So, it's good to sort of have these webinars to know that, if you are managing for conservation, biodiversity, you are going in the right direction. Have the courage of your convictions. And just because some people are maybe jumping up and down and shouting, maybe just reach out to them, give them a tour around your churchyard, tell them why you're doing it. Look at our website, we've got signs, refer them to us, we're happy to chat to them as well. But anything we can do to make your life better. And what often happens, we've got projects where the churchyards manage differently, then people come and collect the hay, and they take that to their local school, they take that to their local gardens. So it's like a little Noah's Ark in the middle of the community that can then spread out. So all the actions you do can make a real amazing ripple effect, whether it's in your churchyard or in your local, common or whatever, wherever you are, planting a tree, whatever. But just to say thank you, because probably everybody here is involved in doing something, and it's really appreciated. Thank you. We'll just wrap up now. The recording will be sent out. And thank you very much for coming in. At the top, there is some more links to further webinars this week. And thank you for being involved. And thank you very much, Bishop Graham. That was really interesting. Thank you.
Great pleasure. And thank you for all you do.